very enthusiastic to see that the observatory has become a reality, and currently there are 26 parliamentarians from 15 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that are part of this initiative, which we hope will grow and flourish with more parliamentarians from different countries joining. Based on their active participation and engagement, just a few months ago in September 23, the OPCC virtual platform and legislative data monitor was released. This virtual platform displays in an interactive and modern dashboard type format data for 1,243 environmental laws and 386 bills and proposals that are currently being discussed in Latin American and Caribbean parliaments. At ECLAC, we are honored to host the OPCC virtual platform and to facilitate the activities of the observatory, including the first parliamentary summit on climate change and just transition in Latin America and the Caribbean, which was hosted by ECLAC in Santiago headquarters in Chile last April. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank the Open Society Foundation for their support to the OPCC and their trust in ECLAC in this task. So, ladies and gentlemen, Latin America and the Caribbean is a region that contributes, as we know, relatively little to climate change. The region is responsible for less than 10% of global greenhouse emissions. However, there is an asymmetry because the region is extremely vulnerable to global warming. And this for two reasons. On the one hand, the region is located geographically in an area exposed to extreme weather events caused by climate change. And on the other hand, the countries of the region have fewer resources to adapt to new climatic conditions. For example, its natural assets, such as forests and biodiversity, have great sensitivity to climate change. It is estimated by 2050, the economic cost of climate change in the region will represent between 1.5 and 5% of the current regional gross domestic product, based on its agricultural and hydroelectric generation losses, disease-transmitting vectors, and extreme phenomena, among other destructive factors. These impacts have nonlinear and heterogeneous impacts between regions and between periods. Our own research at ECLAC also shows that inaction regarding climate change will aggravate development gaps, as it can make low-income countries poorer, and it can further strengthen the middle-income trap. As the great Latin American economist Raúl Prebisch put it regarding the environmental crisis, we are not in the face of new problems, but of old problems that have become more severe. And as we know, they will become more severe in the next few years. We therefore find ourselves at a very key moment in which Latin America and the Caribbean and the world urgently require shifting development models to build a more productive, inclusive, and sustainable future. In recent years, we have articulated a proposal which we call the Big Push for Sustainability, to support the countries of the region in the construction of more sustainable development models. The Big Push for Sustainability is an approach based on the coordination of policies to mobilize, accelerate, and coordinate investments in strategic areas of sustainability. We have focused on identifying what areas are strategic, defining this as those that can drive virtuous circles of economic growth, formal employment, increases in income, and reduction in inequalities, while maintaining and regenerating the natural resource base in which development depends. In addition to the green investments related to electric mobility, energy transition, circular economy, bioeconomy, and others, our research shows that productive development policies and investments in general is a key area because they strengthen the link between the decarbonization agenda and the development agenda. According to our estimates, in Latin America and the Caribbean, policies to drive strategic transformative investments in line with the Big Push for Sustainability can, by 2030, increase GDP by 5.2%. This will be led by an investment boost of 8.5% a job creation acceleration of 3.4%, 8% higher average salaries, and important labor productivity gains. All of this while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 35%, which represents more than the current foreseen reductions in the nationally determined contributions of the region in relation to the baseline scenario without these policies. These figures and findings reveal that Latin America and the Caribbean can be important players in decarbonization if the right mix of policies and investments are put in place. In particular, science, innovation, and technology, productive and industrial capabilities, among other policy areas, are absolutely crucial. We observe that the countries of the region and the world are making important progress in this direction, but at a very slow and insufficient pace. The UN has recorded alarming records of emissions and temperatures, exacerbating extreme weather events and impacts on global climate that are affecting all of us, but the poor and the vulnerable the most. The year 2023 is on track to become the hottest and ever recorded year. As the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, the era of global boiling has begun. Meanwhile, countries are failing to cut emissions. According to UN Emission Gap Report 2023, it is predicted that 2030 greenhouse gas emissions must fall by 28% to be on the Paris Agreement 2% pathway, and 42% to be in the 1.5% pathway. The wide range of challenges facing the region has led us at ECLAC to emphasize the importance of building pacts for productive, inclusive, and sustainable futures. That is, broad national and international agreements and consensuses. We have pointed out that these pacts will not be possible without more participatory and transparent democracies in which citizens are deeply involved in decisions about the type of society they wish to build. We are convinced that it is more relevant than ever to have a clear vision regarding transparency, environmental justice, and access to information, as stated in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration and of the Escazú Agreement. The Escazú Agreement is the regional agreement on access to information.
Esse é um acordo regional de acesso à informação e acesso à justiça em questões ambientais na América Latina e Caribe, que vão estar em vigor em 2021. Não só é o primeiro tratado ambiental da América Latina e Caribe, mas também é o primeiro tratado internacional que inclui provisões para a promoção e promoção dos direitos humanos dos defensores do ambiente. E esse evento não poderia ser mais oportuno, porque todos aqui reunidos em Dubai têm uma oportunidade histórica para transformar modelos de desenvolvimento na direção de um modelo mais sustentável, e vamos ter a oportunidade de ouvir a voz de líderes parlamentares da região e propostas para transformar os modelos nos seus países, incluindo o Brasil, México, Bolívia, Colômbia, e é uma plataforma de diálogo e cooperação interparlamentar que não conhecem fronteiras. É uma honra para nós da ECLAT, eu estou aqui com alguns dos meus colegas, dar o nosso apoio ao OPCC. Eu acho que os parlamentares aqui representados, bem como os 26 participantes da OPCC, de 15 países latino-americanos e caribenhos, e com suas ações pioneiras para transformar a região, são muito relevantes, e eles vão apresentar hoje a decisão conjunta com propostas válidas para a América Latina e o Caribe para construir modelos de desenvolvimento inclusivos na região e além. Então, eu incentivo os parlamentares presentes aqui a assinar a declaração conjunta. Finalmente, eu gostaria de encerrar comemorando esse progresso que foi realizado nessa plataforma. Continuamos disponíveis na ECLAT e comprometidos.
Collaboration and association with the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and hopefully working hand in hand with all of you to increase the size and the membership of this very important platform. So I wish you a very fruitful event. Thank you very much.
Obrigado.
Thank you to our Executive Secretary. Before I give the floor to Congresswoman Célia Creba, Chakriaba, I'm sorry, should be talk about pathways and proposals for a new development model. I'd just like to apologize for not mentioning before the presence of Congress people, Yuri and Flavio Serafim, from a collective mandate. The floor is yours. Hello. Good evening, good morning if you're in Brazil. We're still getting used to the different time zones. I'd like to thank Senator Jacques Wagner, who invited us, and which also had the presence of Congresswoman Aura Carolina and the indigenous group of Congress people. I'm the first indigenous woman to be in this position after 200 years, and also our Vice President, Giovanna Faro from the Amazon. And I'd like to thank you for giving the opportunity to speak here. This is a very important agenda that brings us together here. Our Prime Minister, Congress, men from Colombia, and we have our mixed parliamentary front to defend indigenous peoples. Senator Roberto Faro, Yuri from Rio de Janeiro, Serafim, all the other representatives are present here. And I'd like to say that when we talk about this agenda, thinking about new pathways for sustainable development, I always say that we cannot heal something using the disease itself. So whenever we bring data about the environmental issue in Brazil, traditional peoples and communities, indigenous peoples, that according to the most recent census were around 1,700 peoples, we are not even 1% of the population of the world. We are 5% of the population of the world, but we protect about 80% of the planet's biodiversity. And when you talk about economic status, we have 500,000 water springs present in indigenous lands. So why is it important to preserve indigenous lands? So because most of indigenous peoples are in the northern region, and you have also the state of Bahia with the second greatest, and Mato Grosso do Sul with the third greatest number of indigenous populations. And last year, when we had a 52% increase in deforestation in the Amazon, there was a decrease of 10% in the GDP. So we need to think about a smart economy, which needs to be an economy that won't kill us. That's why it's important to have CEPAL and OPCC here, because we are showing that conservation generates money. It's good for the economy. I am a congresswoman for the state of Minas Gerais, but in my role of president of the Amazon Commission of Parliamentarians, I've visited 18 Brazilian states. I'm familiar with all Brazilian biomes, the Brazilian savanna, rainforest, the Amazon, and others. And everywhere we go, we notice that climate change affects different regions differently, but we also face environmental racism. And these are people who have their identities, and also riverside communities are very strongly affected. I went to a community near the Javari River where you have the greatest area of voluntarily isolated peoples in Brazil. And faced with the reality of climate change, they said, I never thought I would see this river but dry, and I never thought I would see the level of water of these two rivers in the Amazon decrease. And also the population is facing respiratory problems. So climate change is real, it's happening now. And Brazil has a great part of the solution. And we've been telling people, don't throw away this part of the solution we have. So it's important to make these observations here now because we are going through a transition moment: energy transition, economic transition, political transition, and humanitarian transition. I say that uh, the country is getting warmer and warmer, but people's hearts are colder and colder. So there's this imbalance. So we have to make the country cooler and people's hearts warmer. So after the Paris Agreement and in the previous COPs in Egypt last year, we have just been discussing that. And we need to include the topic of funding. We need to have energy. Funding for us means energy. Think about powerful results and initiatives. Always discuss with my colleagues in the Commission and those who are organizing the COP in Brazil. We want to have. We ask ourselves the question: we can come to the COP and how we can vote differently in future. We face this challenge because the Brazilian Congress is a means that is potentially very important to the environmental agenda. Recently, our group of uh, Congress people approved a project which defines the crime of ecocide. And we need to bring this discussion to the table. I was born in the state of Minas Gerais, where mining is one of the great challenges, and we have been discussing here and other COPs. We had a president who was anti-environmentalist, and he said he was going to stop illegal deforestation. But his solution at the time was to make deforestation legal. That's how he was planning to stop illegal deforestation. He was going to stop illegal ore extraction by making it legal, and the same for illegal mining, etc. You see the situation of the Yanomami people in Brazil, where we had children dying from malaria, or a 70-year-old man who was the only person alive of a community that was decimated by um, illegal mining activities in their region. So we need to include that and also discuss the economy. We're not against the economy. We want to think about bioeconomy. We do that. Women do that in their territories, and we want to prepare the lands, maybe as tourist guides. When we're going to have the COP in Brazil, we want to show the reality of these areas, and we understand that financial resources is something that can stop the escalation of climate change. But when I saw the situation in the state of Minas Gerais, where the crime of uh, Vale killed our river, that we can replace some things, but not rivers. So it's important that to understand that the climate crisis right now means that we have a big responsibility in our hands, especially as Brazilian Congress people. I was talking to an OPCC member, and the most amazing answer we can give now. Well, we have many differences, including our political agenda, but we have commonalities, and this includes the environmental issue and the climate emergency, which is the single cause that can unite humans, which is a cause for life. So I'm about to wrap up, but I want to say that we are here to bring another possible agenda to think about a smart economy where we're going to um, use all the power of our territory, of us who are guardians of the environment, because a good economy is an economy that keeps us standing, is an economy where you have the generation of income and you have a just transition, and where we have a commitment as members of Congress with the planet. And now we invite all Congress people of the world to launch the campaign, Congress People for the Planet, because yeah, we want to bring together um, Congress people from all over the world for this common objective. We know that we'll not be here forever, so we want to leave our contribution, our legacy, but the greatest legacy is that we are the last generation that will be able to stop climate change. There are many challenges, but there's a good news. The good news is that the time is now. Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman Celia. Now I will invite Prime Minister of the British Virgin Islands, Natalie Whitley Histo.
Thank you. Good evening. Firstly, allow me to thank the OPCC, ECLAC, and the government of Brazil for coordinating this event. And thank you for allowing me to be a participant, along with my esteemed fellow panelists, moderator, and you, the audience. I'm humbled to bring insights on this important topic from the perspective of the Virgin Islands and wider Caribbean. If the climatic disasters of the past decade and recent pandemic have taught us anything, it is that resilience and security are core to sustainable development. We also know that climate change mandates not only a transformation of the economies of developed industrialized nations, but all nations. So we are here today to talk about a transition to a green, sustainable, inclusive, and just development model. What does that mean, and what are the means and paths to get there? For the Caribbean region, I suggest a green, sustainable, inclusive, and just model is one that is primarily fueled by renewable energy, appreciates environmental protection as central to development, focuses on sustainable models of tourism, invests in economic diversification, and strengthening economic linkages, promotes and supports local and regional ownership and control of economies, and prioritizes sustainable land use, planning as a critical pathway to achieving the above. We see bits and pieces of this model at various scales in different Caribbean countries, but no example to date where all of these critical pieces have come together to produce a working model. I firmly believe, then, in the great opportunity that we have to learn from each other's perspectives and commend the work that the OPCC is doing to help facilitate knowledge sharing. Let's explore each aspect of the proposed model. The Caribbean's overdependence on imported fossil fuels exposes the region to episodes of high and volatile oil prices. According to the Council of the Americas, the Caribbean region spends around 13% of gross domestic product on fossil fuel imports. In the Virgin Islands, annual fossil fuel imports amount to $50 million US, which is about equivalent to our 2023 capital budget. While our region's total contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions is negligible, the case for transitioning to renewable energy is clear, and is equally about demonstrating our commitment to climate change mitigation as it is about energy security and reducing economic leakage. The Caribbean, perhaps, provides the perfect opportunity for creating the first net zero region by taking advantage of its vast solar, wind, hydroelectric, and geothermal resources. Yet only a handful of Caribbean countries have a renewable energy share of more than 10%. The Virgin Islands soon hopes to join this number by achieving our initial ambition of 30% renewable energy penetration. So we must focus on breaking down the barriers to our desired renewable energy transition by building technical capacity, developing the appropriate legal and regulatory frameworks, upgrading our energy grids, and finding creative capital to fund our energy transition, including the growing opportunities of the carbon credits market. We must also focus on starting at scales that we can support ourselves, as they did in Barbados, where roughly 50% of all households now have solar water heaters, and an entire light manufacturing industry has built up around this. There's great opportunity for us to replicate the Barbados model and expand it to rooftop solar. From the Caribbean perspective, green must translate not only to low carbon development, but making environmental management and protection central to the development model. Traditional economics defines the 4 factors of production as land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and accounts for impacts to the environment in production merely as negative externalities. In the Caribbean region, however, where most islands are heavily dependent on nature-based tourism, we can't afford to account for the environment in this marginalized way. We must recognize the land that is our natural environment, including our coastal and marine resources, as the core of our production, and appreciate that it is fragile and its quality matters. For example, a study found that only 30% of tourists would consider a next visit to the Virgin Islands when the beaches would not be there or be in a considerably deplorable state. The needed paradigm shift will require education and awareness, strong environmental legislation, management capacity, and enhanced funding. The carbon credits market again presents an opportunity for direct revenue generation from environmental protection. The Bahamas is blazing the path in the region with its seagrass-based blue carbon credits, with a value potentially exceeding $50 billion, an ability to generate annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. Sustainable tourism has been a buzz term in the region for a long time now, but we are yet to achieve this. For the BVI, the mass tourism model is not the right for us. So we have chosen to focus on being on higher end destinations. We have chosen to remain focused on being a higher end destination that attracts sustainable volumes. This is not only being suited to our fragile small island context, but offers higher returns per visitor. Across the small islands of the Caribbean, we see the repeated story of economies graduating to service-based economies, dominated by the tourism sector. The requirement for resiliency and security, however, forces us to focus on a model where agriculture, fisheries, and tourism exist side by side as strongly linked and mutually supportive economic pillars. Natural areas for diversification of the economy then are agribusiness and the green and blue economy. These ultimately tie back to land and the requirement for enhanced natural resource management. Part of our diversification and resilience strategy must be to find avenues for economic development that don't primarily depend on the land. The rapidly growing knowledge and digital economies present tremendous opportunities for Caribbean islands, and we must strategically restructure our educational systems to exploit this potential. To be an inclusive and just development model, it must support greater local ownership and control of our economies, While foreign direct investment will always be important and necessary, the Caribbean must explore models to enable pooling of local and regional capital to support our new economies so that citizens and nationals can enjoy the full benefit of development gains. Sustainable land use planning will be central to supporting our desired economic transformation. We must ensure disaster risk considerations, environmental sensitivity, and overall land suitability are driving our development patterns, including location type and density of development. Lastly, adaptation to climate change is the cross-cutting factor required to ensure sustainable development gains. In small islands, a single natural disaster event can wipe out GDP and set back development by several years. So access to adaptation funding must be a priority for us. Barbados, through its Bridgetown initiative, is challenging the global financial system and forcing new thinking about sources of finance to support climate change adaptation at the scale that is required. This is something we should all get behind. The Virgin Islands and other overseas territories in the Caribbean find ourselves in the peculiar position where we are ineligible to access international climate funds, such as the Adaptation Fund or Green Climate Fund. We must therefore find alternative means to tap into international resources. In the Virgin Islands, we are seeking to do this through our Climate Change Trust Fund. And if there is time, allow me to close with a very brief video introducing the fund and welcoming your support. Thank you.
Is home to close to 40,000 people, a unique cultural melting pot. But climate change is disrupting life in these idyllic islands through heat waves, coral bleaching, sea level rise and coastal erosion, more frequent extreme flood events, and stronger hurricanes. The Virgin Islands Climate Change Trust Fund is seeking bilateral and independent donors in the priority thematic areas of resilient ecosystems, resilient infrastructure and communities, and renewable energy. Donors have control over application of funds. Please get in touch to discuss opportunities to support the fund and its vision of creating the first climate-smart island chain.
Obrigado. Alô. Obrigado ao nosso querido primeiro-ministro.
Thank you, dear Prime Minister, British Virgin Islands. I'd now like to invite the next speaker, always at the same topic, Congressman Juan Carlos Lozada from Colombia. I'm sorry, the speaker speaking Spanish, so there will be no translation.
La OPCC estaba moderando en ese momento Santiago, que está aquí presente, de la CEPAL, y mencionar también, por supuesto, a la otra creadora de la OPCC, que no está aquí con nosotros, la senadora Gladys González de Argentina, a quien le mandamos un enorme saludo porque estoy absolutamente seguro que nos está viendo por la transmisión en YouTube. Tanto Gladys como el senador Wagner tuvieron la maravillosa idea de crear esta plataforma de cooperación parlamentaria que nos permite compartir una gran cantidad de información y que además ahora hemos logrado, gracias a la CEPAL y por supuesto también al Open Society, unas herramientas tecnológicas que le van a servir muchísimo a los parlamentarios del futuro de nuestra región y, ¿por qué no?, tal vez a todo un movimiento global de parlamentarios por la tierra, como lo planteaba la diputada aquí presente. A mí, pues, además de eso, saludar, por supuesto, al doctor José Manuel Salazar, secretario ejecutivo de la CEPAL, a mis compañeros parlamentarios de Brasil y de las Islas Vírgenes. Yo quería tal vez empezar esta pequeña reflexión diciendo algo que es muy triste si se quiere tener que empezar así, pero pensar un nuevo modelo de desarrollo, un modelo más inclusivo, sostenible, verde, es absolutamente imposible cuando la muerte le respira en la nuca a los defensores de la tierra en América Latina. Tristemente, yo vengo del país que pone más muertos al año, más defensores de la tierra asesinados por defender los intereses comunitarios y defender su propia idea de desarrollo muchas veces contra máquinas arrolladoras, tanto de las industrias extractivas como de las industrias agrícolas. Colombia, una vez más, en el último reporte de Global Witness, es el país donde se asesinan más defensores de la tierra en el mundo. Esta vez, más del 40% de los defensores de la tierra asesinados en el planeta mueren en Colombia. El segundo país, tristemente, también es de nuestra región, Santiago, y es México. Pero Colombia más que duplica las muertes en su país, en México. Y esto tiene que ser un tremendo motivo de preocupación. Pero tal vez pensar un nuevo modelo desde semejante tragedia es absolutamente indispensable. ¿Por qué? Porque si uno quiere de verdad crear un modelo que le funcione a nuestros países, tendrá que atacar las causas profundas de las razones por las que están asesinando a nuestros pueblos por defender a la madre naturaleza. En primera medida, en Colombia, el 50% de esos más de 70 líderes ambientales asesinados por año provienen, diputada, de comunidades indígenas. Esto nos tiene que mostrar, en Colombia los indígenas representan apenas el 4% de nuestra población y sin embargo son más de la mitad de los muertos por defender a la tierra. Y esto es porque hay una batalla campal por los territorios indígenas que yo supongo, por lo que he podido conocer, es muy parecido en Brasil. Recuerdo hace apenas unos años, siendo presidente Jair Bolsonaro, más de 72 resguardos indígenas arrasados en Brasil por las quemas para tratar de cooptar la tierra que le pertenece a los pueblos ancestrales y que han sido los primeros y los únicos verdaderos guardianes de los bosques de América Latina. Y justamente entonces tenemos que atacarnos de manera muy contundente al problema de la tenencia de la tierra en América Latina. En Colombia, de las casi 600.000 hectáreas que se deforestaron en el gobierno de Iván Duque, en el gobierno anterior, ni una sola hectárea ha sido recuperada. Todas siguen en manos de los especuladores de la tierra, que luego meten 5 vacas y que después van a utilizar esa tierra para la especulación, pero también, como decimos en Colombia, para el engorde, es decir, mantener la tierra quieta hasta que lleguen los proyectos extractivos, como estamos viendo en el departamento del Caquetá en Colombia, un departamento amazónico que en los últimos 6 años ha perdido 200.000 hectáreas de bosque y que tiene una de las industrias ganaderas más importantes del país. Y hoy ya empezamos a ver las primeras exploraciones y explotaciones petroleras en ese territorio. Por eso, tratar de reducir la frontera agrícola en un país como Colombia, donde tenemos una vaca cada 5 hectáreas, 42 millones de hectáreas de tierra dedicadas a la ganadería, cuando solamente 5 millones de hectáreas están dedicadas a la agricultura. Poder reducir esa brecha, poder convertir esas hectáreas ganaderas en silvopastoriles o ganadería sostenible y mucho más intensiva de lo que tenemos hoy, es absolutamente fundamental, pero también tener un proceso real de trazabilidad de la carne es absolutamente fundamental. Nosotros lo hemos propuesto y ya hoy, para poder exportar 7 productos que están ligados directamente a la deforestación, la Unión Europea ha sacado una reglamentación muy estricta que no le permitirá a nuestros países exportar si no somos capaces de demostrar que lo que llevamos a Europa no proviene de zonas deforestadas. Esto es absolutamente crucial. Pero también es crucial, y en esto, ya que estoy en el Pabellón de Brasil, me perdonan que a lo mejor sea un poco políticamente incorrecto, pero la propuesta que hizo en el seno de la OPCA el presidente Gustavo Petro debe ser evaluada y tomada en consideración, Jacques, por el gobierno del presidente Lula. La región amazónica debe ser libre de energías fósiles, debe ser completamente libre de la exploración y la explotación de hidrocarburos. En América Latina, el 55% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero provienen del sector agrícola, no de las energías fósiles. Pero si como en Perú, como en una cierta región de Colombia, como en una cierta región de Ecuador, o como se está viendo ya en Brasil, vamos a hacer exploración y explotación de minerales, vamos a destruir el ecosistema más importante que está sobre la tierra en este planeta, y Brasil, Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia y Perú tenemos la obligación moral, ética, de impedir que haya exploración y explotación de hidrocarburos en ese territorio. Lula se puso furioso y dijo que no lo va a aceptar. Pero yo creo que ustedes, que tienen esa fuerza moral de haber hecho durante tantos años resistencia ambiental y protección de los pueblos ancestrales, tienen que hacerle este llamado al presidente Lula, y que la OPCA, como organización regional, sea capaz de decir y de establecer que en la Amazonía no habrá exploración y explotación de hidrocarburos. Por supuesto, hay otros miles de temas, solo me dieron 6 minutos, porque podríamos hablar de la movilidad sostenible en las áreas urbanas de nuestra América Latina, que ahora representan el 70% de la población. Por supuesto que tendríamos que hablar de los ecosistemas marinos en un país como Brasil o como Colombia, que tenemos amplísimas costas, y así refrendar las medidas contra los plásticos de un solo uso, por ejemplo. Pero voy a dejar ahí porque creo que ese tiene que ser el mensaje más importante de todos, y es que como parlamentarios de nuestra región tenemos el deber moral con las futuras generaciones, con nuestra propia generación, con la posibilidad de la vida sobre este planeta, de conservar cada árbol, cada centímetro de lo que nos queda de Amazonía. Y tal vez para eso vamos a tener que tener una gobernanza que va más allá de las fronteras territoriales de nuestros países, y podernos pensar una forma de cooperación que realmente sea capaz de mantener la Amazonía. Y cierro diciendo esto porque veo que el universo me quiere callar. Los latinoamericanos vamos a tener que hacer una exigencia real en esta COP y en todos los escenarios internacionales que nos lo permitan. Hoy el presidente de las Naciones Unidas anunció que en abril abrirá las puertas para una semana solamente de temas de sostenibilidad en la plenaria de las Naciones Unidas. Hace unos años nos dijeron que nos iban a dar una plata para la adaptación. Ahora nos están diciendo que van a crear un fondo para las pérdidas y los daños, cuando ningún país del norte global ha cumplido ni siquiera con el 10% de sus obligaciones con respecto al fondo ya creado para la adaptación, y mucho menos han puesto un solo peso para la mitigación. Yo no creo que nos vayan a dar la plata para lo que han llamado ahora el loss and damages. Yo creo que es un gran sofisma, y si hay una región en el planeta, no solamente el Caribe, sino toda América Latina, que tiene que exigir que los compromisos del norte global con los países en desarrollo se cumplan, somos los latinoamericanos, que tenemos la mayor biodiversidad del planeta. Entre Brasil y Colombia tenemos casi más del 60% de la biodiversidad del planeta. Así que somos nosotros, los parlamentarios, tal vez latinoamericanos, quienes tenemos que alzar nuestra voz como nunca antes, y ojalá que para eso sirva la COP de Brasil, para la que nos tenemos que preparar, porque aquí no nos van a dejar protestar, como no nos dejaron protestar en Sharm el Sheikh, para hacer sentir la voz de los latinoamericanos. Muchas Gracias, Jacques. Muchas gracias a los compañeros.
Ao deputado Lozada. Eu vou convidar o deputado Newton Tato, apenas me perdoe para fazer o encerramento.
So now I'm going to ask the minister to give a closing speech because we need to vacate this room. So I hope you'll be brief. And then we're going to have the group picture with the OPCC statement for this year. Okay, so I'd like to greet you all on behalf of Jacques Wagner and Segner. It was my responsibility to summarize what we discussed here today. So what I'd like to say is that it's clear to us, and this is in the document that will be published, that we are committed to not going back in environmental legislation so as not to compromise the future of future generations. We know that in every Latin American countries and also Caribbean countries, we suffer with moving backwards. But now we want to move forward and to exchange with one another, and we're going to be working with this commitment and using the principle that everything that we formulate in terms of legal frameworks, legislation, public policies, it will all be based in evidence, in science, never, ever, even because of the ethnic, cultural diversity and the history of original peoples of the Latin America and the Caribbean, are going to keep this constant dialogue with traditional knowledge. This is something that should always be guiding our actions. And what we want, of course, is to work in this transition, to have development, but this development should not be at the cost of historical rights of workers. So it's not like a new for ways of producing goods and services, giving up the rights of workers and avoiding losing biodiversity and degrading the environment. And we should have an inclusive development. So in the case of Brazil, we are one of the most unequal countries in the world, and we cannot face climate change if we see it as a problem, because actually the environment has biodiversity, all those riches, natural resources, cultural, ethnic diversity, all the knowledge present there, all its potentialities should be seen as an opportunity for development. And this opportunity to face climate change should not be, we can't go about it the way that was done in the last 500 years. We want to, living at the margin, indigenous peoples, we want to include gender, social groups, ethnic groups, and we want to create legislations that see that as an opportunity ahead of us. So this challenge of facing colonialism and relation between the South and the North involves overcoming this colonial relationship between the North and the South, and also a reproduction of this North-South relation within each country. So thank you very much. Thank you, Nito. Before they turn off, because we are officially evicted, I'll ask you to wait another minute so we can take the group picture here. And after that, we can leave.